Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we are talking about mastery. And we're going to talk about one, mastery is one of the key principles, key components of the simple leadership method. And mastery is one of those things that, and here's the interesting thing. I brought up the 10,000 hour rule, and Robert was quick to remind me that's a myth. Oh, I was like, okay, we're going to talk about that, right? Is it 10,000 hours? Is it something else? Right? And that's sort of the title of our show. Does mastery really take 10,000 hours? Can you master something in less than that? Does it take more than that? And in a typical lawyer fashion, I'm going to say the answer is it depends.
It's my answer too.
Because it's not just the hours. It's not the hours. It's what you do with the hours, right? And it's that way in a lot of areas of our lives and in our work. We can do all kinds of things. It's how you do it, right? Is someone a good, effective leader, right? It depends. And what they do matters. What you do matters, and how you do it matters. So, some opening thoughts as we jump into this topic about mastery.
No, I'm just really excited. Any chance I get to bring up the book Peak and Anders Ericsson, I'm very excited to do that.
Awesome. So I'm going to pose this question to you and drop it in the chat, whether you are watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, live, or on replay. What does mastery mean to you as a leader? What does mastery mean to you? Drop it in the comments, drop it in the chat, and let us know what it means to you. And we're going to start there with Robert. What does mastery mean to you as a leader?
That's a great place to start. It's really having a deep understanding and skill in a particular area, and that's based on a profound understanding of whatever field you're looking at or working on.
And so we're going to talk about it in general, mastery in general, but to more to the point, mastery in leadership, and what does that take, right? I want to lay out a couple of caveats. One, that mastery isn't about being perfect, right? And I think sometimes people think, well, they're not a master because they're not perfect, or an expert. And for women in particular, I know, I think we've talked about this imposter syndrome, but women in particular feeling, oh, I'm not this. I don't have every single box checked. Therefore, I'm not an expert. I'm not a leader. I'm not this. I'm not that. And the bottom line is, you don't have to be perfect, right? It is, in a lot of sense, it's about your attaining of mastery is about being consistent. It's about being persistent and intentional towards what it is you're moving towards. And it is probably as much a journey as a destination. And often we see so many things as a destination, as in we've arrived, and you are constantly mastering things, right? And we've talked about this before. Athletes in particular, right? Or entertainers, musicians, they could be what we see as masters, and from their perspective they always have more to go, more to learn, ways to get better, to move those fingers across the keyboard, or with whatever instrument they're playing, just a little more fluidly, a little more adeptly. or basketball players who have spent thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of hours, over the course of a lifetime and a career, right? Continuing to master and to grow. And so see it as a journey rather than is some destination. When I get 10,000 hours, I will be a master, or I've reached 10,000 and I'm not a master. What's wrong with me? Don't see it as a journey, right? And that you're continuing to progress towards excellence and mastery, and that it is about integration, I think is an important part of this. So that when you are talking about mastering something, you're talking about doing it a particular way, the right way, right? Doing the things that make it easier for you over time, or that you show up with impact, particularly in your role as a leader, right? And so then it gets back to what is your goal as a leader, whether or not you're mastering leadership, whether or not you're mastering being you are mastering being a good leader, depends on what your goal is as a leader. Or even if you see yourself as one in the first instance, again, with or without a title.
Yeah, I agree with all those things you said. So where are we going to begin with this? We started with the definition of leadership. What's the next thing we need to talk about with the people watching the show?
So let's talk about some of the key elements of mastery,
Okay.
right? So we talked about what it is in general, but what are some of the key elements that help to get you there?
Okay. I think that as you know, I always have a list of things to talk about. So I think the first thing is really having a clear goal of what you want to accomplish or what you want to master. That's really important. It needs to be very specific. You can't just say, I want to be good at basketball. That's not specific enough. What things in basketball do you really want to be good at? Sure, certainly you want to be excellent at the entire game of basketball, right? But what aspects are going to get you to where you want to be? Do you have a baseline skill level there? Or are you better at free throws than you are at driving to the hoop? Are you better at 3-point shots? So you need to know, have a basic idea and a goal, and be very clear and specific about it.
I love, of course, that you brought up basketball because
Mhm.
it's it's one of my favorite sports, and it makes great analogies. And to your point, of course, when you started down that path, the first person I think of is Steph Curry, right? Some other people came to mind, but Steph Curry. And in terms of mastering a particular aspect of something, and so you can aspire to be a masterful leader, but start with a particular component of leadership. So maybe it's mastering communication. Maybe it's mastering within communication, it's mastering feedback. Maybe it's mastering accepting feedback or delivering feedback, right? So you can take something and break it down. Steph Curry is an excellent ball player. Some other players came to mind, LeBron James and some others, but I was thinking first came to mind offense, defense, right? And usually someone who's really good in offense, that's because they focus their attention there, as opposed to people who have mastered defense and they have put their attention there. It's not to say that you can't be both, you can't be good at both,
Right.
but it tends to be one or the other. And then within offense, like you said, 3-point shots, driving the basket, being a slam dunker. I think of a couple of years ago with the Clippers. Um, uh, oh shoot, his name escapes me, but they
Blake
had
Griffin.
Blake Griffin, yes, right, and the alley oops, and that was his thing, and the people that were dishing that out for him, setting him up for the alley oops, right? And so, yes, you can be good at lots of things, and taking the time to sort of figure out what it is, what your goal is, and what you're going to focus on. And it's interesting. I just got off right before we started, got off a call with a client who is needing to make some shifts in her business. It had been very nonprofit focused, and with the new administration and some of the uncertainty around grants for nonprofits, and she's making some shifts into a different space, and we're talking about mastering a message that is more appropriate for the direction, and having to start with, well, what's your goal? What's the vision? Where is it that you want to go? Before you can hone in and get there, you need to, focus. You need to know where you're going. And that takes, not to step on your toes about your list, but in case self-awareness is not on your list, all right,
Yes.
we're going to talk about self-awareness, and then we'll come back around to your list, right? Having some self-awareness around what it is that, where there are opportunities and areas for growth for you,
Right.
right? And so, where are your blind spots? Where are some of the rough edges that need smoothing out? Going back to, let's say that you decide, I'm going to focus on being a better communicator. Right? I'm going to master communication with my people. I'm going to start with feedback. And I'm going to start with delivering feedback, how I deliver it, when I deliver it, and making sure that it's effective and it attains the purpose for which I'm delivering that feedback, right? And so, having some self-awareness around how where you are currently, so that you can identify the gap, so that you know where to go and what you need to do to get there.
Yeah, and I have two separate buckets that I'm looking at this. Things that leaders should master, and mastering any skill in general. So self-awareness is definitely on there, on my things that leaders should be thinking about mastering. So
Absolutely.
the second thing that I have is really doing some research. So once you have a goal, you need to, if you don't think you're good at that particular skill or area, do some research. Get some books. I'm big on books. If you haven't noticed, get some books. Go to a course. Get a mentor. Find someone who is better at that skill than you are. They can show you the ropes. Really important. So that's the second thing, is really just doing some research to find out, what do I need to do to become a master? I have a goal. Now, what do I need to do to get there?
I love that.
Yeah. And a lot of times when we look for people that are mentors, we have some choices, right? We may have a choice where somebody is good, they're adequate, but then we want to really look at somebody who's an expert, who's already mastered that thing, because they're going to help you get further along in that. I think the next thing to do after that is, you've done your research, you have your goal. Start breaking down that. Let's look at it from the standpoint of a particular skill. Start breaking that skill down into some manageable components for you, so you can start practicing. You don't start learning the Spanish language. I mean, sometimes you do by learning whole sentences, but you want to have vocabulary first in most cases, so you can start constructing those sentences, and then you can put those things together as an example. So you want to start breaking things down, so you can start looking at those components and working on those components and seeing how you're doing. Then the next thing, and this is where it really matters. And you said something early on, and I wrote something down. Practice. It's on my list, but I didn't write it correctly. You have to practice in the right way. Like you said, you have to have what's called deliberate practice. So when you first start out, your practice is going to be fairly easy. It's not going to be rigorous, because you're just learning the basics. You don't, let's use basketball as an analogy. Free throws, you're going to learn the mechanics of it, right? Or 3-point shooting, you're going to learn the mechanics of it. You're going to start with that. And then after a while, when you start to get pretty good at it, you need to stretch yourself just beyond your comfort zone. That's deliberate practice. So it can't be too easy and it can't be so hard that it
Mhm.
frustrates you. It just needs to be just outside your comfort zone so it stretches and challenges you to do a little bit more than you've done before. That is where you want to spend the majority of those hours. And let's go back to that 10,000 hours thing. So the question is, it depends. And you said it depends on what kind of practicing you're doing, but it also depends on the skill you're trying to master. It may not take 10,000 hours. It may take 7,000 hours. It may take 14,000 hours. It really depends on how you're practicing and the skill in and of itself. But sometimes we forget that there are some things that are easier to do than other things, right? So that's the other thing. And then so you're getting that practice and also that deliberate practice, but it's also real world practice. You don't want to
Mhm.
just be, if you're working on being a good public speaker, it's great to line up your stuffed animals or pillows and have those conversations in front of them, but that is not real world practice. That's only going to stretch you so far. They're not going to ask challenging questions. They're not going to interrupt you. If they ask you challenging questions, then you have another problem. But you need to get some real world practice so you can stretch yourself further there as well. And then you need to get some feedback. Simple enough. You get some feedback. How did you do? Chronicle how you did. Take a look at your successes and failures. That's when you start to uh, initiate some self awareness as well. And then the last thing, and this is also very important, and sometimes we forget this, is really go back and revisit the basics. Every advanced thing you see is based on very simple, basic principles. And we forget that because a master will make the hard stuff look really effortless. But it's really based on those basic things that they've learned so well that they are flawless almost, not perfect, but to the point where it looks like it's flawless. And that creates mastery when you look at it from the outside.
I love that. This whole thing about the number of hours, 7,000, 14,000, 10,000, whatever it is, right? What I heard from you ultimately is it's about the quality of we'll call it input for the sake, right, of our conversation, the quality of your input, not the quantity,
Right.
because what is practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect,
There you
right?
go.
And again, it's not about being perfect, but it's that component of doing it the right way. It doesn't do you any good to practice something that is not delivering the outcome ultimately that you want. And so whether it's in leadership or something else, what came to mind was my growing up. I played tennis. My father was a tennis instructor, played tennis from as far back as I can remember. And I remember having conversations with my father, and it's like, well, I did practice that. And he's like, did you practice it the right way? Right? Because what you're doing, he would say his thing, he had two things: bend your knees and get your racket back. And I would say I am bending my knee. He's like, those aren't those aren't bent knees, right? If those are bent knees, then you don't know what bent knees are. And so then the question becomes, and as you were talking, I wrote down success with a question mark. What is the definition? What is your definition of success? Right? We're talking about having a goal. What is your how will you know that you're making progress towards mastering whatever the skill is, whether it's leadership or something else? How will you know you're mastering that without measuring what success is? And you can't measure whether or not it's success. What you're doing, that the time that you're putting in is yielding the results that you want if you don't know what it is you're moving towards. So what is success? And often success, certainly in sports, is winning, right? Winning and losing, sort of the ultimate measure of success. And the thought is, if you're doing the right things, eventually it gets to the point where you're winning. And so is that happening with your team? Right? Is that happening with your team? Are you reducing turnover? Are you reducing internal problems, communication problems? Are you increasing productivity? Are you creating an environment that gets you the results that you're looking for? In the end, all you can do are the steps, right? The steps don't guarantee the outcome, but you're more likely to get the outcome if you're doing the steps, the right steps that move you towards what it is you want, which is why it's so important for you to have clarity, as Robert mentioned earlier, having clear goals, having a clear vision of what that looks like, what success is, and what success looks like.
Yeah, there are so many components to that, and so many ways that trying to master something can go wrong, right? So we usually don't talk about that, but especially when it comes to leadership. And what I find, or what I see a lot of people doing, not my clients, but
Of course, not your clients.
my clients don't come to me with this particular issue. But when I was working in offices, now I only go there when I'm on a contract. But when I was doing that as my main, source of income, what I saw a lot of were people that were framing success based on their organization, right? So, which is not a necessarily bad thing to do. But when you look at people in your organization who are successful, but they're bad leaders. See, you can be successful and be a bad leader. And a lot of times we look at, well, that person has a great title, that person is making a ton of money. I want to model what I do after that person, because in this organization, it will hopefully make me successful. Well, that person is yelling at their employees. That person has a ton of grievances against them. You don't always see all of that stuff. And so you really, when you're choosing someone to mentor you, or choosing someone to pattern yourself after, make sure that you're looking at the qualities that really matter and it's true leadership. I think the problem is that I used to, sometimes with my clients, I would have them do this fun homework assignment. When they were new managers, I would say, they'll be like, well, you're saying we're talking about leadership, and I think leadership is one thing, especially when I was doing my training courses. They'll be like, well, you're saying leadership is one thing, and I'm saying that leadership is about, micromanaging. And I go, well, that makes a lot of sense. I said, go home. Here's your homework assignment. Go home, turn on the TV, any show that is set around in an office, and look at the leaders there. Most leaders in those shows are people that are either micromanaging or using, I call bad faith leadership, like yelling at people and telling them, you got to do this, being quote unquote strong. That's why it's so prevalent that we don't have those models of people that are seen as really listening, being empathetic, especially showing empathy, being vulnerable, because those people are considered weak, and that's not weakness at all.
No, absolutely. Um, Anything else on this aspect? Is that your entire list?
That's the entire list. I mean, there's always more, but those are I think I think that's the kernel, right? The cornerstone of the getting mastery is really starting with those 6 things, and then later on there are other things that you can bring in there that will help you. But I think this is a really good way to start.
Awesome. So then I want to shift to, why does this matter? Why does mastery, why does it matter in life in general and in leadership?
Because people are always looking at you. That's why it matters. But let's think about it. As a leader, people are paying attention to what you're doing all the time. even when you don't think they are. And so it really matters, because when you're talking about up-leveling your career, those are the things that people are going to look at. People are going to look at how well you do certain things, how well you've mastered certain aspects of leadership. I have a separate list for that, and it's not complete, but it's, like I said, the kernel. But people look at those things. And the other thing that I think is really important is getting some, I mentioned feedback, but getting some strategic feedback. And I learned this from David Peterson and David Goldsmith when I was studying under them. And they were like, look, it really doesn't matter how good you are at something if people don't see you doing it. So getting that strategic feedback, going to them and saying, look, I've been working on some skills. I'm trying to improve in this particular area. I would like to check back in with you over the next couple of months to see how I'm doing, in your opinion, because that person is probably, you should go to somebody who's going to be able to adjudicate your performance, whether it's your manager or your manager's manager or somebody in the leadership team, because it really, you can be fantastic at doing your presentations in front of your pillows. But if you're not getting out in front of people and leveraging your improvement, it doesn't matter.
No, I agree that concept of being people are watching, right? If for a couple of different things. One is you're an example to your team. And if you are desiring, expecting your team to continue to grow, level up, be ever more productive, they need to see you doing the things that they need to be doing, right? That allows them to get there. So being committed to the work, being disciplined, and maybe even having some sense of humility in the process. But the other part of this, well, two things come to mind in terms of that is confidence, right? Is that you can show up with real confidence, not some fake bravado around, trying to show up as if, when you can actually be the if, right? So you don't have to pretend to be something. If you take the time, put in the time, the commitment, and the discipline to master something, then you have the confidence internally. And it doesn't have to be a fake bravado that comes across in those behaviors that you mentioned earlier, like yelling at people. And that comes from a place of insecurity and fear. That people who are strong and confident in who they are and what they are bringing to the table don't need to behave that way. I think the other piece of this, outside of sort of the example part of being seen, is that it enhances your credibility. And your role as a leader is to be an influencer. And so if I know that you are credible, that you have learned something, that you have the ability and the skills that you purport to have, not pretend to have, right? It enhances your credibility, and therefore you are better able to influence me. And so it shows up in a number of different ways that benefit you and the team long term.
Absolutely. And the other aspect of that popped into my head while you were saying what you were talking about is really, it helps you with challenges, because when you show up as an expert or somebody who's mastered something, you're going to get a lot of questions. And some of those questions can be very challenging. Some of those questions will be direct challenges to your knowledge, and being able to talk really coherently about whatever subject matter you're presenting really does enhance your credibility and helps you deal with those challenges. I always tell people, when they're trying to master something, particularly when it's some kind of I want to say cognitive skill, but not really. It's anything that requires that you know definitions, right? Something like systems thinking, which I don't think we've really talked about on the show, or complexity. Memorize some of these things and then get a really good understanding of what you've memorized, because it's a lot easier to look credible when you can say, this is what I mean by that, instead of going, oh, wait, I have to consult my notes on that. So memorization really gets a bad rap when it comes to mastery. People like I don't know if you've experienced that when you were in grade school, but we were told, don't memorize stuff. It's like, well, what's the only thing you're supposed to memorize is a times table. That's it. Everything else you're supposed to just know, right? Or you have books for that. But there are certain things that you should memorize. And I remember when I was in coaching school years ago, and there was this chart that we were all learning. It's what I based my coaching off of. It's called the energetic self-perception chart. And the founder of the school was like, they were like, well, how do we know this? He said, memorize it. And people like, pearl clutching. He said the M word. Yes, you need to memorize certain things. There is nothing wrong with that, but you also need to know it, not just regurgitate it.
That feeds into, I think, a concept of being adaptable and accountable, right? Because if you are memorizing things, but really knowing things, it allows you to dance, I guess, right? Rather than I've memorized it and not knowing what to do with the information, right? So the memorization is that you have a download, but you don't know how to use it. And I'll give this example. No one except lawyers will probably get this unless you were fans of the movie or the TV show, The Paper Chase, right? The concept of Socratic method and the way, first of all, I didn't experience it the way it was portrayed in either the movie or the TV show. But the Socratic method, basically, and the way it shows up in law school and in life in a different sort of way, is that, right? Law students, we read these cases and you write down your notes and you come to class and you're asked to summarize a case, and you summarize the case, and then the professor starts asking questions about the case, but not about the case in front of you. It's taking the information from the case and being able to shift it based on a change in the variables, the change in the facts, right? And if this fact change, how does this change your analysis? And so if all you do is memorize, and nothing wrong with memorizing, but if that's all you do and you don't really know it so that you can adapt it for other situations, you've lost some of you've lost the ability to say that you've mastered, that you've memorized it, but you haven't mastered it, right? And that would be the nuance, I would say, in that. And so yes, learn it, memorize it, or maybe that's where it starts for you. You memorize it and then you start taking it, how do I change this? And like math, you said memorizing the multiplications table, right? You memorize the multiplications table and then you are able to do other things with that, right? We learn the basic operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. As you move up in mathematics classes, right, you're able to do different things with those four operations, right? In reality, math is boils down to like one operation, right? It's addition, and either you take addition, or you take something away. And then multiplication is addition. Exponents is addition on multiplication on steroids, right? And so it builds on itself, and that's being adaptable. It's taking the one thing memorizing the multiplication tables, right? Which nobody but me in school enjoyed. That's why I studied math
Mhm,
originally in college.
mhm.
But being able to take that and adapt it to different situations, word problems, right, is the example of adapting what you've learned from the basic operations. And then now we're applying those principles to real world, as you mentioned earlier, real world problems or challenges or opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that came to mind when you were saying that is you're memorizing so you can apply. And that's the thing that people forget. You're not just memorizing something for memorization's sake. You're memorizing it so you can apply it. So you have that. I see memorization as having the bookshelf in my head. So I can just in here pull the book down and so not go downstairs to the bookshelf and pull it off. But the other thing is we're used to we here's the funny thing. We memorize things every day. We don't
Yes,
realize we're memorizing them. And when, for example, tennis, you're doing memorization when you're learning it. That's a terrible backhand, but you're learning, you're memorizing. Your body is
that was
memorizing.
more a ping pong backhand.
Yeah, that's ping. Okay, we'll go with ping pong. But that's your body memorizing. You
Yeah.
do it over, and I teach martial arts, and I have students, and my students will be like, "Well, when can I move on to the next form or whatever?" And I'll be like, "When you don't have to think about these motions. When you can do these motions without thinking about them, that means your body has memorized them. Um, you need to have that kind of, I want to say, for lack
Muscle
of
memory.
yeah, it's muscle memory, but I call it automatic recall,
Yeah.
right? Without you having to, go, oh, wait, what am I supposed to be doing? Where are my feet? Where are my arms? That's what you need to have as a leader because it will boost your mastery and
Yeah.
credibility.
No, I love that, right? And so you start with the memorization, you adapt it, you modify it, you apply it, right? That continued usage allows you ultimately to master something so that you don't have to think about it anymore. It's just now a part of you. And so to the degree that I guess the other part of the 10,000 or so hours is being able to apply what you're learning to different situations so that you build a library, a memory bank or a library that allows for you to pull for things so that when you see a new situation that you've never seen before, right? I think this becomes a real component of mastery. You master something when you see something you've never seen before and you can pull from what you've experienced and make educated, informed decisions. I was going to say guesses, but decisions about how to move forward. And more often than not, right, given all the variables and the things that you're pulling together, that you get closer to where it is ultimately that you're trying to go. Right.
Absolutely.
So whether you're playing an instrument or on the basketball court, right? Basketball is not just you posting up and shooting balls, right? There are obstacles on the court. And the more you understand the obstacles, the permutations of those obstacles, right? That's when they say they've got real basketball knowledge or football knowledge or whatever it is, right? That because you've studied the game, you've studied the whatever it is, music, martial arts, tennis, etc. You've studied it enough and you recognize that if I do this under this circumstance, I'm more likely to get this outcome, right? And so in tennis, you hit the ball over the low part of the net, which is the center of the net, just a higher percentage shot. You do that on the run as opposed to running down the line, hitting the ball down the line, unless you have hit so many balls down the line, right, that you can say that you've mastered that shot. but in the beginning, right, you're looking for sort of the easy way to start to build the muscle, the memory, that bank of knowledge that allows you to continue to add and grow, to adapt, right? And then ultimately to be held accountable for the decisions that you make.
Absolutely. And as you're doing that, or as you were talking about that, a couple of other things came to my mind. And one is, when we look at leadership, we tend to think of it more of this solitary journey. And it's
Mm,
really not. We're taking people with us. And just like when you're playing basketball or tennis, you know that if you do certain things, your opponent is going to react in a certain way. You become attuned to that. And the more mastery you have in dealing with those particular things, like warding off somebody trying to steal the ball, or somebody's backhand on the run, or whatever, their forehand, you get better at predicting those things. And the better you get at predicting those things, the more success you're going to have. The same thing with people, right?
yeah.
So when we're having a conversation with someone, we know typically, if we have some kind of self-awareness, how people will react to us if we do certain things, because we have some data. I know that when I talk a certain way, it turns people off. I try not to do that. Right? So we know this. This is the data we're getting. This is the feedback we're getting. And it's allowing us to adjust that. I also know how to help people feel more welcomed in a situation. I tried to do that more than turning people off unless I don't like that person. But as a leader, you learn these things, and you
Yes.
should be employing those things with your team. You should be getting that feedback, because leadership is not a solitary endeavor. That's why it's called leadership. That's why you have leaders and followers, right? You're trying to inspire and motivate them so you can create this team that can achieve the things that you want your team to achieve, whatever that's based on your vision, which is another aspect of leadership and mastery. So it's not just you mastering these skills to master these skills. You're using them so you can bring people along with you. Those are the people that you are engaging with every day.
Two things came to mind: relationship, right?
Right.
Leadership is about relationship.
Mhm.
And the other thing is, and when I'm training, when I am coaching, the skill that I think is undervalued in all of this is the understanding of human nature.
Yeah.
Right. And you just said that you didn't use those two words, but that's basically what you said, which is the more we understand how people at least are likely to act, to respond, to behave,
Right.
right? Because we understand what people want, what drives them, what motivates them. The more we can understand about human nature, the more we can leverage that in our calculus of what we're going to do next and how we're going to behave, so that the feedback is the important part of this, that and that's the feedback, right? When someone responds a particular way, that's feedback,
Yep.
right? Regardless if we think they should have responded that way or not, it doesn't matter. That's what happened, and that's feedback. And so that should go into your data bank so that you can process that and see if there are patterns, right? And when you notice patterns, you want to make note of that as opposed to one offs, right? If you got one person and 10,000 people that you've managed over the years, and one person behaves a particular way, it's an outlier.
Mhm.
The rest of them, this is what you get. Then you're just like, okay, this is this is what it is.
Right.
And there are going to be outliers, but you need to understand whether something is a pattern or if it's an outlier. And understanding human nature is going to help you get there.
Absolutely. You said it way better than I did.
So the sort of the last question is when does this matter, right? We talked a little bit. You talked about, people are watching, but when does matter?
Mattery matter? You mean mastery matter?
Mastery matter.
I think it matters all the time because it's a
Mm,
journey, right? Because we're starting this journey now, and it doesn't end. And that's the thing that we have to remember, that when you start that mastery journey, there's always something to learn.
yeah,
So it matters, it should matter all the time, because you're it's not just about other people looking at your performance, even though I mentioned that, and it's true, people are always looking, but it's about how you want to define your success. And so you start, and then you realize that it's going to be a journey that's, you're going to become a master. To
yeah,
some people, you'll be the master. And in your circle, in your bubble, you're going to be that person. But then when you look outside of your bubble, you're going to see somebody that's higher up, who has more, more mastery than you have. And so that's when the new endeavor starts to get even better. And you're going to find, as you do this, if you're self-aware, that there are certain aspects of your skill or in your domain, whatever that domain is, whether it's leadership, whether it's being a lawyer, whether it's a coach, you're going to find that you have strengths and weaknesses. And you need to look at, okay, what strengths do I have, do I want to, put in the forefront of my performance, and what weaknesses really matter for me to start working on, the ones that are going to have the, what weakness is holding me back from getting to that next level, so you can start coming up with the plan and doing all those things over again, breaking things down, doing your research, um, getting a mentor or going to a course or reading. You're doing all those things over again. So there's that micro, right, practice that you need to get in there, so that you can take that weakness and get it to the next level. And then the process starts all over again.
absolutely. Right. Lifelong learner is a term that sort of came to mind, that as leaders,
Mhm.
leaders are readers, readers are leaders. We are constantly in the mode of learning and growth, or at least we should be, right? Because again, going back to the concept of being adaptable and accountable, the more you are learning, in handling feedback and the like, taking and applying what you learn, not only are you mastering that, not only are people seeing that, but it again, it allows others to see an example in you that helps them. And so things are always changing, right? In your environment, in the system that you're in, there's challenge, there's change, and your ability to adapt and grow is is a function of your ability to master and continuing to master things, because the variables are always changing, right? You wouldn't want it would be a destination if you learned something and nothing ever changed, right? Then it would be a destination. But something is always shifting around you. And so you need to be able to do that in order to be able to handle things. So if you feel like you're stuck in a plateau or rut, right? Being willing to say, I'm going to master this thing, allows you to continue to move, to gain momentum. Um, when you're scaling, right, systems and consistency and clarity, all of those are critical parts of being able to do that. And so being willing to be on in pursuit of mastery becomes a part of that.
Yeah.
And so it's specifically a time would be when you are making a transition, career transition of some sort, right? To a new role, new responsibilities, changing jobs, a new industry or something like that. Right. That's sort of a natural time where it's going to be a part of you've got a new learning curve.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a natural part of that. But as Robert said, there's always now is always the time to be in pursuit of mastery, to be learning and growing.
Yeah, and you said something really interesting about plateaus, and this is where I'm going to bring up the book Peak. I finally got a chance to do it. Because in the book, the author mentions that those plateaus we get frustrated when we hit those plateaus. Always remember that when we're hitting those plateaus, there's other learning that's going on beneath the surface. And usually what happens after a plateau, you get to a new level, right? But we tend to get frustrated because it doesn't seem like we're making any progress. But when you hit that plateau, that's a sign that something is about to happen, right? There's something going on that you don't recognize it because your brain is this, we forget how complex our brain is. And it's making all these connections and doing all these things. And there's all these chemicals and all this stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And so we're just working on with our outward awareness, right? Our consciousness, we're just going, okay, I'm struggling. I'm working on this thing. I'm working on this thing. And before we know it, we hit a new level. And that happened to me when I was running track. I remember I was a sprinter, and I was really focused my sophomore year on the 100 meters. I wanted to be in the 200 meters, but my coach was like, you're running the 400. So my sophomore year, and I didn't really like the 400, but he had me in it all the time. I did okay, well, when I was a freshman. Sophomore year, I hit a slump, and I just could not break through in the 400 meters. And I just said, I'm not going to worry about it anymore. I'm just going to do what the coach tells me. My junior year, we were actually is holding tryouts for the away team, right? So, because we were going to go to the Penn Relays, which is like the big meet that we're going to go to. And he put me in a heat to see if I, with a bunch of other guys to see who's going to make the team. And I just got in there and I just relaxed. And instead of just trying so hard, I said, you know what? I'm just going to go and see what happens. And I got around the track, around 3/4 of the way around the track. I noticed that I heard this really furious panting, right? And I'm like, why is everything so loud, right? Why is everybody breathing? Well, they were trying to keep up with me. And so I just took off, and I beat everybody, but it was because I was relaxed, and there were things that were happening when I was struggling my sophomore year, to get better at this race that I really didn't like. But just practicing it and working on it, trusting my coach, doing my work over the summer, it made a big difference. And we sometimes forget that when we hit those little, those bumps in the road and we get stuck, we're about to make a breakthrough. But what happens with a lot of people, they just quit. That's it. They just give up.
I know that feeling well.
Me too.
Right. It was like all this work and it's not doing, I'm not getting anything out of it. It's not helping us. And then you tell yourself, just keep going. And all of a sudden you see the shift, right? You see a different outcome. It's like, oh, right. And what do they say? Right when you're ready to quit, you're on the verge of a breakthrough.
Yeah. And that
along that line. So
it's a saying for a reason.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the what, the why, the when. So the question is, what's your next move? What are you going to do? What do you need help with, right? How can you go deeper so that you can get to the how? How are you going to personalize, take what we've shared with you over the course of this episode and level up your pursuit of mastery? How are you going to do that? And The question for you, Robert, is if someone wanted to do that and they wanted to reach out to you to work with them to help them become a master at leadership or anything else, how would they do that?
They can reach out to me at okay. They can reach out to me at inspire me at roberthilliardcoaching.com, or they can just go to my website, which is Robert Hilliard Coaching, get to that contact form, fill that out, tell me the things that you want to master, and we can set up a discovery call and see if we're a good match for each other.
Awesome. And if you'd like to reach out to me, shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. I too have a form you can complete. You can share what it is that you are looking to master, what you need help with, and we can go from there. Also, if you are interested in being on the show, we are looking for guests who want to come on and talk about leadership, their leadership journey, how they're helping others to lead and be better leaders, to master being a great leader. We would love to talk to you about the possibility of being on the show, or if you've got a topic that you would like for us to discuss, please reach out and let us know. And whether you are watching on YouTube, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, leave a comment. Let us know that you have watched the show, answer the questions, right? We had a couple of questions. The first question, I'm going to go back to what does mastery mean to you as a leader? What does it mean to you? And then the other would be, what area of leadership are you currently trying to master, if any? Right? Let us know. Maybe you're saying, I'm not trying to master anything. And then I would love to know why not.
Yeah.
All right. Why are you not trying to master something? Leadership is a journey. It's not a destination. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. We are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And, mastery is an important part of you becoming the best leader you can be. So keep taking the steps to keep being a great example to your team of what that looks like. And until next time, take care.
Bye now.